Top of the morning, the afternoon, and the evening to you. I am your host, Anthony Moore. AntMoe, for those of you who may know for sure. And welcome to Cultivating Konversations, where we curate cultivating conversations for the culture. And to my right, maybe your left, we have a man that is making some moves from what I hear in the mental health space. And he's also, can dabble behind the camera, has some expertise in that. I want to introduce to some and welcome to others. Jay Kyle, my dude, how you doing? Yes, sir. Yes, sir, man. So welcome to Cultivating Konversations, man.
Glad to be here.
So it's my interview platform, man. I always tell people that I want to learn about the man or woman behind the business, because I feel like if somebody can buy into you, they don't have no problem buying into your business, right? Yeah. And so, I always start off with a few questions that may not be so tell me, how rough was it when you were growing up in the hood? Like, do as much of that. We get there at some point. I like for it to take a journey of its own. But just some regular icebreaker questions, man. Like, what's the best trip you ever been on in your life?
Ooh, let me see. Best trip I've taken. Man, that's difficult. I don't take many trips.
I was just gonna say that. You've been somewhere now.
I don't really know. Maybe that's a really good question. The best trip I've been on, Chicago. I went to Chicago for the first time last year. It was a work trip, but it was amazing. I got to see some of the architecture downtown Chicago. Absolutely mind-blowing. It was a photographer's dream. So food was great. It was a really good time. So, yeah, I put Chicago on the map.
So you're co-signing what I've heard a few people say, because I've heard some people say that Chicago is one of them places. The downtown, all of that stuff, the food was all super dope. Yeah. So you're right. So now that's got to be one of the things that I add to my list. Yeah. I've told people, I'm like, listen, I would love to travel to Paris and all of those places. Can I hit New York first? Like, I went to Cali for the first time last year. That was a dope trip. You know what I'm saying? So for you have not to, in your opinion, been as well traveled. Where are you actually from?
I'm from upstate New York, Albany, New York. Shout out to the 518. I was born and raised there. I moved down here to Dallas in 2019.
Wow, so, okay, yeah, fairly new.
Yeah, I haven't been down here long. So, I've been to New York City a few times, and you would think living in New York State, you might be in New York City a lot. They're two totally different places, two totally different worlds. Yeah. But, yeah, it's an experience. If you've never been to New York City, go.
Never been there for sure.
And go to upstate. Okay. Two different experiences.
So in asking you this next question, are we safe to ask what brought you here? Or you okay? All right, you know what I'm saying? Be like it was Brother Smash when he was up north, and now he had to change his identity.
Yeah, no. I always tell people, you can ask me anything, just be sure you want the answer.
Right. I'm with that.
What brought me to Dallas? I'll give you the concise version. Is I was being obedient to God. I was going through a lot of different things while I was up there. Nothing like legal trouble, but just my life, my identity, didn't have one. And I was like, I want to get out. I need somewhere to go. I wanted to go to North Carolina. My sister lives there in Raleigh. And I heard the Lord say, clear as day, you're going to Texas. Now, at that point, I had only been in Texas once. I came to visit for a Dallas game, Cowboys game. And I remember when I first got here, I was like, it's flat and brown and dry. I don't want to be here. And I remember thinking, it was, I was like, the weird thing was when as I was landing, I was like, I would never live here. Lo and behold, a few years later, God would call me to the place that I said I would never be.
Get him, Lord.
Yeah, so it brought me down here, and I didn't know why. God told me that, what he had for me was down in Texas. My time in New York was done, and what he had for me was bigger than New York. It took me the better part of 3 years to learn why I was here. And a part of that was detoxing from the mentality that I had, healing from the brokenness that I had, discovery for the identity he had for me, and then learning how to do the mission that was assigned for me. So that's what brought me down here. That's why I'm still here.
That's good. Man, listen, you living out obedience is better than sacrifice. Brother. Not the easiest thing. Man. Abraham is like, hey, I'm going to take you to this land that's promised. And you like, what land? Like, pulling you from, like you said, the identity. It's like, yo, my daddy, them, they all worship the sun guys, the moon, Yeah, man, it's interesting how that stuff works, man. I felt like, I'll go back to I think it was 2011, 12 maybe, on impending divorce. And it's like, I felt like God was telling me, you're Abraham. And I'm like, what does that even mean? And I grew to fall in love with the story. And so I was set on I'm going to move to Cali. And then a few years later, it was I'm going to move to Atlanta, all of those things. It was I was kind of centering it around my gifts, my talents. I grew up, I remember I was in the 4th grade and my teacher, I don't remember her name. I remember everything about her though. And, we were doing speeches, or something like that. And I remember I had my little white T-shirt. I was dressed like a Mormon. I had the white T-shirt cut off at the sleeve, I don't know if I can't remember if I had a tie with the black slacks, I go in there and I quote some of the I Have a Dream speech, and then I put my own little spin at the end. Okay. And my teacher stands to her feet and she's like, I got chills. You're going to be a speaker. And I'm like, that's one of the first affirmations I got in life. You know what I'm saying? And it always stuck with me. But knowing what it looked like was kind of the sticky place. Grew up in the inner city. Grandmother raised me. Mom was in prison. Dad was doing whatever he was doing. So it was to dream about entrepreneurship or being able to do something outside of punching in a clock somewhere. Yeah. Was very foreign. Can you resonate with any of that?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, for me, I knew early on, well, it was said to me early on what I'd be. Grew up in the church, born and raised. Early, they told me I was going to be a preacher. I had this weird fascination for the Bible and Bible stories. I was the kid who, once I found out that David cut off Goliath's head, I was like, oh, y'all forgot to tell me the best part.
Yo, wow.
This thing is full. And so, God gave me a natural ability to speak. I never went to school to learn any of that. And so the combination between speaking, personality, understanding the word, studying it, it was automatically deemed that I was going to be a preacher. And so I kind of walked in that. I was doing ministry as early as 15, doing youth and young adult ministry. I've been just about every position in the church except for lead pastor. And so that was a part of the identity challenges that I was having. You know what I'm saying? But I knew that for me, even growing up, I didn't want to just, work the regular job. It was boring. I had this 2-year max. I could be at a job and I'm like, I got to do something else because I'm ready to go. This is boring. Yeah. So I've always had that, I need something different. And it took me a long time to kind of figure it out what that is. So I resonate with that for sure.
Yeah. And even going a little further down that rabbit hole, getting into the whole, what God kind of pulls out of you or kind of makes more aware as you go through the ups and downs of life is like I said, my mother was in prison a majority of my life. Father wasn't around. So there was a lot of these identity crises that I would go through as far as wanting and thriving for love. I wasn't never a guy that was super chasing down every woman I ran into. You know what I'm saying? It was I want that one. I want us to fall in love. I knew I wanted a kid at 10. It was all of those type of things, man. Super angry, very harsh. Just this I would like to say polished jewel in a sense of definitely gifted, talented, impactful, all of those things. But it was just muddled in just hurt. Why don't nobody love me? I probably was, I ain't gonna say I was the only one, but I remember being 12 looking in the mirror yo, why don't my parents want me? I understood at a young age, you chose this life. They always told me I was wise beyond my years. I used to sit around the adults, man. They would be talking. I'd be 7, 8 years old, and I understood what they were talking about. They be trying to spell out words, and I'm I know what that means. So it's you got molested by my cousin when I was young. So it was one of those things where it was I grew up so fast. Grandmother my freshman year, she passes. Simultaneously, my first kid is on the way, conceived, married at 19. So life was just like boom, boom, boom. And then I got a younger brother and sister. Like I had this hero complex. I want to save everybody. You know what I'm saying? So it was like, but my grandmother kept us in church. She didn't go as often, not nearly as often as she was pushing us out that door. Wow. But I believe it saved my life because I was a very like loyal, like I basically like, I participated in a B&E and didn't even know that's what it was. But in my mind, I was being loyal to my cousin. Somebody disrespected him, so you disrespected me. I'm 14. But, I was always in church, man. And, knew that guy, got saved at 12, but, still had my struggles with having sex, drinking at a young age, all of those things. It was like one of those things where I didn't realize, like, to skip ahead, I didn't realize that all the things I didn't have would be the things that I would have to represent to people. Yeah. And I would have to be a representation of something I had never seen. And so I think for believers, that is the hardest thing, is to like know, like, okay, I have 3 kids, by the way. Okay. But it's like knowing like you have to be a father when you never had a father. Like you have to like know how to treat a person when people didn't treat you that way. Some of the most hardest lessons to learn in life. So how did you, did you deal with the duality of, being this guy that's serving, that's, called to preach? What were what were some of the pitfalls you had to deal with that have kind of led you to get to even where you're at now?
Yeah. So, performance was the basis of everything. I am the youngest of 4. And being the youngest of 4, my sister's the oldest, and I have 2 brothers in between. And my family was known in the church and in the church world back home. My mother still is to this day, a choir president. My brother was a well-known drummer. Both of them they were football stars and athletes. My sister had her set of friends, and then there's young little Justin. And then growing up, I wasn't Justin. I was either Margie's boy, Lil Mike's little brother, or the youngest Owens. And so it wasn't until, and I was also the heaviest of my family members. So I grew up with, back in the day, cracking jokes and all, that was a thing. So I grew up with this need for validation. And this is things that I didn't find out until going to therapy within the last few years for it to all make sense. But I grew up with this, like, I want to be seen. Like, yes. Hey, I'm here.
Significant.
Yeah. And so it wasn't until I actually had the opportunity to start speaking. Like I said, I like the word. I could talk. And that opened up opportunities for me. People started inviting me places. I was getting, for the lack of a better word, notoriety, but it's just people paid attention to me. Yeah, for sure. What happened was the attention started to feed the deficit of desire. I wanted to be desired. And as I started to answer the call of ministry, I was ordained a minister and elder. And by this time, I was married to my then first wife. I struggled with some of the stereotypical things that men struggle with that they don't talk about. Porn, masturbation, emotional relationships, performance anxiety, all of these things, while still preaching. I can remember, and a part of that too was because I wanted to fit this image. I wanted to be the young guy who was married, had the first lady. I used to feel like I was above people because I had never been to jail, didn't have kids out of wedlock, didn't have any kids actually. I owned my own home, had a car, great paying job, married. Like, the picture looked perfect, and I wasn't even 25. Excuse me. I wasn't even 25.
Yeah.
And so, I'm looking at my brothers, and they had their issues and their challenges, and I'm the youngest, and I'm doing this thing. I got this moral, position that looks really good. So I'm feeling myself without really understanding that I'm feeling myself. because the danger is when you put people who have talent out there without actually being trained, without actually helping them understand who they are first, their identity becomes what they do. And so that's what happens. So the duality of having to hold up this persona of the good guy, the good boy, the good Christian boy, was there. And then my own silent struggles. Like I said, my first wife. So, my marriage is struggling. Eventually that didn't happen. I found myself getting involved mentally and emotionally with women at work. Although it didn't evolve into a physical relationship, I'm having dreams, I'm having desires. Eventually that led to my first marriage falling apart because she wasn't what I wanted her to be. We had our own internal issues, but still got to be a good preacher, so I got to put on face.
For sure.
So, I got to preach the good word and smile. But y'all don't know that we just had an argument all the way to church.
Yeah, for sure.
We shut it down right before we walked in.
Yeah.
Or would show up to church without her, preach, good word.
Yeah.
And then go home and we not talk and not communicate. And so it was hard to really navigate all that because at that point in time in my life, no one was talking identity. No, that wasn't even a word that was within my circumference. It was, I don't know about that. You do this. So what you're supposed to do. And if not for anything else, whatever wasn't working was demonic. So, that's everything got thrown on the altar of demon. It's like, I'm casting out this jelly donut eating demon. Like, no, you just ain't got discipline. And so you try to pray a thing away. You try to use prayer to manipulate people into doing the things you want to do, not realizing that God is not a sorcerer, nor is he a magician. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And so I struggled with the duality of being true to my call and being true to me, not knowing that I didn't know who me was. And through time, I've learned that in all of my relationship failures and my career failures, the common denominator was me. I didn't know me. I thank God for his grace. Because of his grace, I was able to get through the circumstances. I don't even know, we ain't got time for this, but I could tell you some things that I've gone through, some things that I've done of my own hand, of my own mind, that God sure enough should have just struck me down in the pulpit. Yeah. Like, there's no way in the world you're going to call yourself a representative of Christ and do the things that you're doing behind closed doors or allow the things to happen. And I thank God for his grace because he knew his plan and he knew that at some point in time there was going to be an opportunity for me to purge all of that. So, I struggled with the duality of trying to live up to what I thought I was supposed to be, the image that was getting me attention, and these secret sins, these secret demons, these things that I wasn't telling nobody about, that I honestly did not have proper, practical solutions for. Like I said, everything was pray away, pray away, pray away. Prayer is necessary, but I should say prayer is necessary, and Christ gave us very practical tools on how to live right. And so without that, I struggled a lot.
You are cooking, and I'm going to tell you why. I have been on a practicality kick so strong because I'm like, we have such high and lofty ideas of what it's like to live the Christian life or to be a good man. And it's like some of this stuff is just like, it's simple things that we supposed to do to kind of help us. Going back to what hit me, a simple thing that we hear that's from the word all the time is that God gives gifts without repentance. So what happens is like, I could sing, I could rap a little bit, I could act, I could do all of these different things. People only care about the gifts a lot of the time. So the person inside of you that's hurting, that needs, a pat on the back, or, because you can do certain things well, or I have a certain level of confidence that I exude, they don't think nothing's wrong with you sometimes. And so we don't get the deeper look sometimes, and everybody's talented in their own way, but then some have 3, 4, 5 different ones. And so that's what I look at. And then it's like looking at somebody who's gifted at such a young age to be able to speak and lead people. It's like, you look at the Bible, it's like David was, anointed as king. It's like 17. Mm-hmm. He didn't officially become king until he was like 30, 31. So it's like everybody has to go through that season of purging and being pushed down and being able to learn. Joseph, sent off at a young age. And then, when his time, came in his 30s, he was there. So it's like in our community specifically, even a lot of the times it's like, well, get him out there, sure. And it's never really checking to make sure that that person is good. Like, the people who may watch this, it's important that you understand that, like, gifted doesn't mean scarred. It doesn't mean that, I haven't had experiences that may have hurt me or that I need to get better at. Those secret sins you speak about, those things that people, struggle with in the church mightily. The enemy is like a roaring lion seeking whom he shall devour. And so, man, that's so real, man.
Yeah, when you think about it, bro, Lucifer was extremely gifted. If I could, I'm a foundational person, so when I'm speaking to men, which is a part of my call, I speak very foundationally and simplify things just for principle's sake. Lucifer was extremely gifted at entertainment. Mm-hmm. He was excellent for it. He was created for praise. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at the fact that his job, amongst other things, is to destroy, to distract, to twist, to pervert that which is true, of course, he is going to come after people through their gifts. And what we tend to do is we tend to look at people's gifts and we want to get the best out of it because we want to get entertained. Now, there's a negative connotation to the word entertain. When you think about entertaining, it really just means to hold the mind's attention. Mm-hmm. And when you're speaking about our community goes after that so much. And we could go through the rabbit hole of where that comes from and generational curses and all those things. But we do the same thing to God. We find ourselves chasing God's hand instead of his heart. But God showed us when even they wanted Saul to be king. And it was like God made it clear, like, y'all are looking at his stature. You're looking at all these things about him. I'm looking at the heart. When you look at a lot of the relationship stories that we see in the Bible and what's important, the widow who gave her last, it wasn't about what she did. It was her heart's posture. And a lot of times when we are dealing with each other, with ourselves, let's just start there. Forget everybody else right now, because a lot of times we also mess it up too because we don't start with self. We are often judging ourselves, assessing ourselves, our successes or our failures based off of what we've done with our hands. Mm-hmm. And we've not taken the time to understand who we are. We've not taken the time to understand why we think the way we think, where we go, why we're even triggered with what we're triggered and where that came from. And because of that, because we will assess success and failures by our accomplishments or the lack thereof, we tend to do that externally with other people, with God, with career, and then we find ourselves out here doing all these great things, but to what avail? You see people who make great success, and they're still not happy. You get the Robin Williams of the world, who's a great comedian, a wonderful actor, but then offs himself because of depression. I was watching a video today about Derrick Rose, excuse me. He just had Derrick Rose Day on the 4th, retiring his jersey. And one of the things he was talking about was like, with all the accomplishments I've made, it was like, what would you do if you never got injured? He was like, I don't know. But I was so obsessed with the game that if I even won one championship, I probably would have won it 4. But then I would have never learned true self. I would have never learned who I was. And to see someone so accomplished to say that with all those things, what's the biggest value, the best thing it was for me is to know who I am. Yeah. It's always been that. It's always been relationship with God, relationship with self, so that we can have relationship with others. And that's where we tend to miss it.
That's tough, though, because when you look at what typically, and so, I got a couple different thoughts. It's like, as black men, right, it's tough because we are judged so much on what we can do, not who we are. And I'm like, can we take that back to slavery? Can we take that back to, is that the new Jim Crow? Is that, welfare, when that was introduced, like it all makes sense to me in my mind, but it's kind of hard though at the end of the day when you're a man and you still understand that there's expectations, to take care of your kids, to be there for your family, to provide. All those things are still very much present and relevant, but it's like, how do you not wrap your identity in those things, understanding the world that we presently live in?
I'd like to answer that question. The way a man does not wrap himself into what he does while still having the responsibility of what he does is knowing how he got here. That's important. Mm-hmm. I've learned in my journey that who I am is the most vital piece, because who I am is with me no matter where I go, no matter what I lose, right? Let's take, for example, the glove. If I put a glove on my hand, if I were to say to you, I have a baseball mitt on my hand, what do you think I do for a profession?
Baseball.
Okay. If I had maybe like a pot holder glove in my hand, what type of occupation do you think I'd have?
Chef.
Okay. Mm-hmm. If I had one of those tight plastic surgical gloves on my hand, what do you think I'd be?
Somebody in the medical field, doctor.
Right. Yeah. But if I take each one of those gloves off, what's still existing?
Your original hand, who you are. Yeah. Right.
If we don't take the time to learn this, who we are, then we will be defined by that. And that's necessary because who you bring to what you do is more important than what you do. Mm-hmm. My mindset, why I'm providing for my family. Are you providing for your family because you want them to not experience what you didn't get to have as a child? You hear that like, oh, I grew up this way and that way, and I don't want my children to ever experience that. That sounds noble, but that's one of the worst reasons why you lead a family. It's like salvation, right? We're not supposed to love the Father so that we don't go to hell. Having right relationship with Jesus Christ automatically keeps you from going to hell. But if I'm in this so I don't go to hell, I'm not loving the Father. I'm just avoiding hell.
Correct.
That takes relationship. That takes identity. And so how do we find identity? We have to go back to our maker, right? Yeah. We were talking earlier about cameras. That camera has an issue. The only way you're going to find out how to fix that camera and what to do properly with that camera, you got to call Canon. Canon can tell you exactly how that. I don't care what sleeve you put on it. I don't care what lens you put on it. I don't care what stand you put it on. I don't care what conditions you shoot in it. If you are not communicating with Canon, you will never know how to use it. And at best, you will use it minimally wherever you are. So if we as men are going to be effective with whatever we do, we have to first understand that we come from a creator. And we have to take that time to have a relationship with the creator to understand first who he is. Because when we understand who God is, then we understand who we are. Why? Because we're made in the image and likeness of God. We find in 1 Corinthians 13, where it talks about love, God gives a full description of what love is like. Mm-hmm. And if we can learn how to do that first to ourselves, then we have the ability, one, to give it, and we have the ability to know how to receive it. We have the ability to discern what is and what is not love. A lot of times we get caught up in relationships that we call love, and it's not. Or we block ourselves from love because it don't look like the way we thought love should look like. So that relationship is required. I'm a little bit of a comic book nerd.
Okay.
My favorite character is Superman.
Oh, you see,
I love Superman.
See, right? you kind of work. See, you kind of turned into my guy without being my guy. You feel me?
I love Superman.
Thor and Superman are by far the two best characters. I get they, I get they on two different sides, but yeah.
So you get the Superman thing. What I tell people a lot is, we look at Superman only through two identities: Superman and Clark Kent, and that's how he saw himself the majority of the time. Clark Kent, although not his true identity, and then Superman. Mm-hmm. And through that, and you mentioned this earlier, we have this Superman complex, this hero complex where we got to save. But if you follow the story, even Superman wasn't complete and whole in who he was until he found out his actual name, Kal-El, and the only way he found that was actually being introduced to his nature and his father through the Fortress of Solitude. What Superman taught us in that story was that the only way to be fully all who you're supposed to be is you have to have communication with your father, your creator. Because Superman wasn't super because of the fact that he was a Kryptonian. He was super because he was a Kryptonian amongst humans. He was greater than who he was around.
Yeah.
We as men of God, when we carry the Father in us, we are greater than the world we are around. I don't care how many children you do or don't have. I don't care how many jobs and how much money you do or don't make. If you are not connected to your Father, then you are flawed at best, and you will not fulfill all that you're supposed to do. My last example is you think about, I flew a lot this past year. Thank God. It was an awesome opportunity and experiences. And one thing the flight attendant always says before you take off or as you're ascending, in the case of a loss in cabin pressure, the air masks will fall. Put it on you first and then go help somebody else. So yeah, you might be helping and doing and taking care of your family. But what good is that if you are not at your best? And the only way, I'll say it again for those who are listening, the only way a man is going to be able to have full, complete identity in who he is without being overtaken by what he does is to spend the time knowing who he is by knowing whose he is and having that connection so he can be that in his full purpose and potential.
That's good, Doc. So, you know who Darius Daniels is?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a part of the Daniels Den, and one of the things that they have you do is come up with this personal calling statement, right? And it's pretty much like, you know, putting your purpose into words in a sense, you know? And so it's like, I think what I put for mine, because I did it a long time ago, but it's to curate and cultivate safe spaces for men and women to be whole, healthy, and healed through group forums, through social media platforms, and, you know, different, whatever, you know, arenas that God allows me to be in. You know, I typically show up and I have this level of like candor and, you know, honesty that usually, I ain't gonna say it's never in the room, but it's like I have a large degree of it. It's just the way I've always been, right? And so you basically are supposed to use that to determine like the things that you do in life. Like, what do you say yes to versus what do you say no to? I'll take a flyer on that maybe next time. So I've done like think tanks. You know, I'm a part of something called the Good Dad Tribe, you know, bunch of fathers that talk. You know, I usually moderate for stuff like that, you know, have podcasts, you know, I post things on social media like through threads and different things that kind of put certain messages and thought provoking things into the earth, you know. How did you come about understanding your calling to men, and what is the extent of what that calling is?
Great question. I came into understanding through my journey. It is a extension of what God walked me through. My time from New York to Texas was a time of, like I said before, detox. It was a time of healing, learning. And then it was a time of understanding who I was. That whole talk that I just gave about identity and all that, I literally walked through all those steps. God guided me through that. I even wrote a book about it.
Okay.
And in that, God taught me who I was and what I was supposed to do. I remember clear as day, I was at a friend's house, and God said to me, now that you understand who you are, now it's time for you to turn around and help the next man, because there's more men like you who do not know who they are. And I'm calling you to rebuild, restore, and rebrand the broken identities of my lost children, because my kids are gone. They've gone through experience, and they don't know who they are. And so I, while I was going through my journey, I had a therapist, first time. I had a life coach. I had never heard of that. And all this happened since I had moved to Texas.
Okay.
And then I had a friend. God used those three individuals. While I was in that space, I could not, and leading up to that, I could not find support groups. I couldn't find a men's support group. Now, men's mental health has been a very big buzzword, probably like the past 3 years. You hear it all over the space.
For sure.
2018, 2017, 2019, you didn't hear that.
Nah.
It wasn't around. And so the only thing I could really find that had men connected to it was something for same-sex attracted men, but that's it. I couldn't find a space and a place that I could go and tell someone, hey, I was in a relationship, an abusive relationship, where my then wife actually tried to kill me, and I ran away. And I couldn't find a space to talk about that, and I feel like I was shameful because I'm a man, and how does a woman get to beat on you and me? I couldn't find a space to say, hey, I actually tried to take my life twice because I felt hopeless. I couldn't find that space.
Wow.
I couldn't find it anywhere. So once I went through my therapy, once I went through coaching, I thought about becoming a psychologist. I was like, well, I ain't got the money all the time to go through that. And my life coach was talking to me about coaching. He was like, maybe you should consider that. And so I looked into it. And as I learned about coaching, I said, oh, this is almost like ministry. And so I went to school, got certified to do life coaching. And as I was doing that is when the Lord made it clear. He said, now that you're gaining tools, turn around and, quote, create a safe space and a safe place for men to be vulnerable. I'm going to give you what you need. I'm going to give you the tools. I'm going to give you the system. You've been healed. You've been working through this. Now turn around and go help them. And so I started a nonprofit called Rebrand the Man. Rebrand the Man is all about rebuilding, restoring, and rebranding men into who God created them to be. I started to see how statistics, like since the 1950s, men in the United States commit suicide 5 times more than women. But women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with depression. I said, well, how is this? How is it that we are getting? And I started to think about me, like, bro, you tried it twice. How did you get there? I was like, oh, because I ain't had nobody to talk to. I was built up, and I felt absolutely useless. I seen all my failures. Didn't feel like I could talk to nobody. I felt like I was praying to God, but wasn't hearing nothing. I said, that's how. And so as I started to walk this out, and as the Holy Spirit was leading me, he said, I'm going to show you how to do it. And the funny thing was, talk about God preparing you. He talked about Joseph and how his story was lining up to everywhere he was supposed to be. Years ago, when I was doing youth and young adult ministry, I was doing something called the Breakdown. And this was back when the term millennial was new.
Yeah, okay.
And like 2004-ish, 5-ish around the time. Long story short, I was like, yo, how come we don't feel comfortable asking questions like, is God okay with me smoking weed in church? I couldn't ask a question. Or how come I can't have sex before I'm married? And I was like, we should be able to talk about that. So God gave me a way to have what they now call safe space conversations for young adults to talk about it. And it blew up like wildfire. It started in my house. I was like, I knew I couldn't do it at the church because we just couldn't. But it got so big that I had to move it out of my house. And then the pastor who I was with at the time said, you know what? Just bring it to the basement of the church. We'll do it on different days. And it became so wildly successful that we started to do it on our Sunday morning services. And we would literally just get up and create this space and do it. And so God said, that same formula, we're going to take that same formula that you've done for years, that you've had on a shelf because you weren't ready to do. You got trained, but you weren't quite ready. Go back and get that. And I'm going to show you now how we direct this just for men. And so we've been doing that now. The Lord has blessed me to be in a position. By trade, currently, I'm a barber. Photography and videography is what I do as far as like my other license and skill sets, because, you know, you talked about that earlier. But my regular 9 to 5 is I'm a barber. I've been doing that for over 20 years, and I'm out at a barbershop in Fort Worth called the Cutting Room Barber Salon. Well, the Lord just linked me up with that owner about a month ago. I was telling him about what I was planning on doing and just finding spaces. He says, bro, just use my barbershop. He said, I would love to be able to help and support your ministry, whatever you want to do. So we're getting ready to start hosting the Brotherhood. And the Brotherhood is something that is designed to help men understand them, to understand God, because there's a lot of men who, they love the Lord, but they don't understand the word. They don't have a solid biblical foundation. We're going to do that in a safe space. We're going to have these type of conversations, and we do it in a way where we can all be talking about I don't care what the topic is. You could say, I feel like cheating on my wife. No one would know it's you, and you wouldn't be judged. It's literally we tell and don't judge in person.
Yeah, for sure.
Without exposing who that is. And so we're doing that this month, January 29th is going to be our first launch for that. And then we have a bunch of initiatives through the year through our nonprofit, and it's literally about creating what I couldn't find. Yes. I couldn't find a safe space to get this out and to teach you, because one thing that God has allowed me to do, he's allowed me to see why people do what they do. That you can sit here and tell me all of this stuff, and the Holy Spirit, I mean, I've had sessions, literally, I'm talking to clients because, I coach, and so I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, you do this, that, and for that, have you ever done this, that, and the third? And they're like, yeah, how'd you know? I said, let's talk. And I know that's the Holy Spirit. So we're doing that for men, specifically for men, to come and talk, and let's build and let's rebuild you. And while my arms are open for men in general, I do have a specific call to men of God, men who identify themselves as Christian, or men who have questions about God, and because you need to be strong too. Because mind you, all the stuff I've been telling you, I was brought up in the church, bro. Right. At one point, I was preaching, and none of that mattered. I still went through all this. I still tried to take my life twice. I still was struggling with porn. I still went through multiple marriages. I still was unfaithful. So just because you in the church and you love God, that don't mean, we seen it. David, man after God's own heart, killed a woman's husband just to cover up the fact that he got her pregnant. Some mafia type stuff. Yeah. You know what I mean? So there's a need there. So that's what we do. And 2025 is a year that I'm thankful for. One, because I made it. Two, because God is going to open up the door for more men to find out who they are, where they are in life, and why they exist. And that is our purpose.
First of all, David is like, I'm like, that is my, what do they call, spirit animal? I've heard people like prophesy that to me. It's like, it's almost like you're David, or you have like that spirit of David on you. Like people surround you, like you have this effect, like, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, as I thought about that story, I've read it a million times, and I'm thinking on what you said, and I'm like, it's weird because of the flaws of what David was struggling with, which was in a lot of ways his identity. If you look going back to, okay, he was at odds with his brothers for what reason? Some people say that they believe that he actually was like a bastard child because he wasn't anything like his brothers. His how they described him was nothing like his brothers. His daddy didn't even mention him. Right. And so I'm just looking at the
family, and he had family in the land of Canaan. Remember when he was running from Saul?
So you might have just hit me with some other stuff that I didn't.
When he was running from Saul,
I didn't catch.
He went to the Philistines. Yeah, he was able to hide amongst them. David had family there.
And so what I'm thinking about is those wounds that he had would allow him to not kill a man that he should have. But since Saul was the only man to ever receive him, because his daddy couldn't have received him. So Saul being this man that received, you'll shed innocent blood over here, but you won't do what probably needed to be done with Saul. Now, God obviously had some grace on his life for not doing that. Whether it was right or wrong is here nor there, but that was just interesting to me. But no, I think back to, speaking of that, I've been in the church my whole life. And so in 2023 though, second marriage, I'm going through this process of divorce myself, and strongest bout of depression. I've never experienced this in my life. Start therapy. Never did that in my life. I thought that was for the weak. Mm-hmm. And it's like, or not for the unbeliever, maybe, because I got the Holy Spirit, so there's no way. Yeah, me? I don't need that. Go talk to somebody. Right. What are you talking about? Right. Come on, yeah. The Holy Spirit, nothing can depression that can't overthrow this. And it's like, that's the devil. Yeah, it's not. And so just going through this whole transformation of understanding yeah, it's Jesus and therapy. They can work together. Amen. And just understanding like just certain aspects of what manhood was, like not feeling like, excuse me, like I was less than because now I have to go and talk to this person. It was the most, I mean, the way that this woman created this safe space for me to just bleed with no judgment and actually built me up in a way, like I said, in comparison with getting in the word and being in prayer and having a long time with God, it all built this thing up in me, this newfound strength where I could actually get up. She told me, she was like, you probably actually dealt with depression as a kid. But because how we are raised a lot of the time, especially in the black community, is like, well, we don't have nobody in our business.
Right.
We keep all of that stuff behind closed doors.
Right. You don't cry as a man.
What my granny used to say, if you ain't crazy, you better act. What did she used to say? If you ain't crazy, you better act crazy. But it was like the opposite. It was like almost like don't put yourself in a light that is unwarranted. Even if it's justified, like the things that we experience or the way that we express ourselves as men. And so now the only thing I'll say is that I never had like suicidal thoughts or ideations or anything, but it's like everything short of that. Like I'm talking about getting on a couch every day, not wanting to do anything, not doing anything. I would get up, go take my kids to school, come back, and I would sit on that couch, and that was it. And I never saw myself as a type of man that would even behave that way. But, man, that spirit, man, is something that I believe it plagues those who don't know who they are. When you don't have healthy outlets, it's like we go to God to be saved, but we confess our sins to one another that we may be healed.
That's what the Bible says.
And so it's like you don't want to talk to people, though. And so I almost wanted you to speak to the idea of, you a man, bro, suck it up. Like, what are you going to talk to people for? Like, they didn't have that back in the day. Like, what is your experience with that? How often do you run into those type of things when you're dealing with somebody in life coaching or when you're, and then the other thing I'll say before I give you the floor for that is like, it's crazy because he was talking about how we are similar in a lot of ways, share the same mission. I'm like, probably before all that popped off, maybe more so 2022 going into 2023, I created the Mind of a Man think tank. And it was just this space for men to come together and, build. It wasn't just about that. A lot of times we're talking about those things that plague the hearts of men, but it was also this thing where it's like, well, let's talk business. Let's like just opening up this floor for us to like, let's do life together in every sense of the word. And so, life kind of happened and got away from it, but desperately one of those things that I wanted to, get back into. So even hearing you speak about it is like, that's somebody I can partner with. It definitely gives me that push to keep, no, don't stop, just keep going. Because God was sending resources. God was sending those resources. Like a lot of stuff that came to the studio was from a brother that was like, man, I just love what you're doing, bro. I mean, I'm talking about he sliding me 50s and 100s. I just love what you're doing, bro. Like, every think tank, he's spending $75, $80 on wings. I mean, but it was like, I'm just doing nothing but showing up and providing a space. Yep. But it's like, man, I do believe that when you are in that vein of purpose that God has put you in, that's how it works. The purpose does come. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, bro. Toxic masculinity is a real thing, bro. And I've run into it a lot with a lot of the guys I speak to because there's this personification that all men must be tough. And their definition of tough is we don't show emotion, we don't cry, suck it up, get over it. And in some instances, I get it, especially within our community, and we go into the history because you didn't have the luxury of being weak in front of the man. You didn't have the luxury of looking like you don't have it together when you have a very open, oppressive community trying to take you down. A lot of our grandfathers and great-grandfathers, they went to war. So, you don't got the opportunity to show yourself vulnerable and weak to the enemy because that's how they get you.
Yeah.
And we bring that war mentality back to the streets, and now we're fighting war within ourselves. So when your enemy knows where your weak spot is, then they get you. Unfortunately, it, like you said, and I believe everything comes back to identity.
Yes.
And I see it a lot where men feel like, oh, I can't say this, I can't do that. I'm like, okay, but how good are you though? How well are you faring with it? How's that working for you?
Yeah.
Because in all of you not crying and all of you got to be tough, bro. We here having this conversation. You about to lose it all for the sake of being tough. And I'm like, it makes no sense for anyone to think that men don't communicate, to think that men shouldn't show emotion. Because if that's the case, then on Sunday, when we're watching football, don't yell. Don't scream. When you watching the finals, just watch.
Yeah.
Oh, he hit a 3.
That's cool.
Oh, wow, touchdown at the end of the game. Now, we are full of emotion.
Yeah.
And we show that emotion when we feel it's safest.
Yes.
And I think also, again, it comes down to the fact that when you are sure of who you are, you could care less about who approves of how you are. The one thing, well, there's a few things, but the one thing I'll say that I admire about, and I don't know how your show gets monitored or all, so I'll say by the alphabet community. Sometimes
you can say whatever you want to say, my brother.
Social media be trying to shut stuff down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
well,
so I
you know.
But what I do admire about same-sex communities, same-sex attraction communities, one thing I do admire is that when they get to a place that this is the identity that they've chosen, they stand on business.
They walk fully in it.
All the way in it.
Yeah.
All the way in it. And you know what the crazy thing about it is? If we, as men, and if we as people of God, knew who we were and stood on it, if we as men and people of God, once we find out who we are and still stand on it, even in the face of opposition, the world would be different. What I found in a lot of my studies is that our world is where it is from imprisonment population to the number of children in mental health clinics, to violent crimes, to even teenage pregnancy. You know what they're all linked to? Primarily, fatherlessness. What that tells me is if we as men understand who we are and stand on business because of who we are, not because of what we do, we can literally change the trajectory of the world. Christ didn't come to save your job. Christ didn't die for you to be a millionaire. Christ died and rose so that you can have right relationship with the Father, so that you could be exactly how he intended, for you to walk, live, breathe, have dominion in the likeness and image of God. It was all about identity, who you are, what you're supposed to do in the likeness and image of God. So, to those who have a hard time because maybe their family, or their friends push this narrative that you have to be strong, I challenge them to redefine strength, because I know an example of strength is a woman full of tears pushing out a baby. That's strong. Mm-hmm. I know strength being a man who could turn this whole room upside down and rage, but he doesn't because he has self-control.
Humility.
What is super powerful. So, maybe we watch a little bit, not so many of these action movies that say that strength is kicking down the door, shooting everybody and stabbing the dude in the neck. And that's not necessarily strength.
Right.
Strength can be, I'm going to stand here in peace. Yeah. I see strength in, like Dr. King, when you can spray me down with a water hose and I still don't come after your family. Yeah. That I can still pray for my enemies when they've actually done me dirty. Yeah. When I can look at an ex-spouse who went and lied, who painted this picture, and I can tear your whole world up, and I decide to, I'm not going to do that, because that's not going to benefit me but feed vengeance inside of me. I'm going to go get healed. Yeah. I'm going to pray for you while I move on and keep it going. Some people call it being a simp. Some people call it being less of a man. But that's nothing more than just the enemy looking to continue to dilute and pervert what real masculinity is all about, because the Father has emotions. Jesus had emotions. Jesus' boy died. And the Bible says he wept. My homie is gone, and I'm over here crying. and I'm gonna go do what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, I just going back to what you were saying, it made me think about John 10:10. Yeah, but you'll hear me reference Darius Daniels a lot because I think he's just brilliant, number one. But he talks about that Zoe, that life that when Jesus said, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. And I think that when we look at knowing who we are, knowing whose we are, then that opens the door for us to walk in purpose, which gives us full lives. Because now we're not walking around chasing after money because we think that's what society is telling us we should do, or that's not the measure of what the type of man that we think we should be. No, we are operating under the reality of who God intended us to be from the beginning, and there's no better life to live. Right. And so, man, that's good stuff, man. I think there's still some other things, some other meat left on the bone. So you're going to have to come back to curate another Cultivating Conversation. You feel me?
Yes, sir.
Man, this was a pleasure, man. I did not meet this man but at this point 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
So we just sat down and got to it, but this is what the platform is about. And so it's like if somehow we start transitioning into the weeds of whatever it is, for the people who it's for, I believe they would love to know you, get on board with what you're doing. And so that's what it's all about for me. Sir. So this was the epitome of what Cultivating Conversations is about, man. And so we are going to sign off for this time, man. I thank you, my boy, J. Kyle. It's a pleasure for part one.
Yes, sir.
Man, this has been another episode of Curating Conversations, where we curate Cultivating Conversations for the culture. Until next time, we love you. May the Lord keep you. See you next week. Peace.